why you can't let go. Think of someone you have lost, not someone you chose to leave. Someone who was taken by death, by distance, by the slow erosion of years. A parent, a partner, a version of yourself that no longer exists. Now notice something. Even now, perhaps years later, there is a part of you that still reaches. You hear a song, you turn a corner. You wake at 3 a.m, and for half a second, the world is still the world where they are in it. Then it corrects itself, and you feel the reaching. Why does the mind keep reaching for what is no longer there? In the 1950s, a psychologist named John Bowlby made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of human connection. He found that we are wired for attachment, not as a preference, not as a personality trait, but as biology, as fundamental as hunger. An infant in a laboratory chose the soft cloth mother over the wire mother that actually fed it. It chose comfort over food. The drive to attach is that deep, but 25 centuries before Bowlby, someone else was looking at the same phenomenon. Link number 9 in the Buddha's chain of dependent origination has a name, upadana, clinging. And the chain says this: from craving comes clinging, from clinging comes becoming, from becoming comes birth, from birth comes aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress and despair. 2 traditions, same phenomenon, the reaching, the holding, the inability to let go. Completely different questions. Bowlby asked, where does clinging come from? The Buddha asked, where does clinging lead? Tonight, both answers. Chapter 1. The biology of clinging. It begins with a wire mother. In 1958, at the University of Wisconsin, a psychologist named Harlow built 2 surrogate mothers for infant rhesus monkeys. One was made of bare wire mesh. It had a feeding bottle attached, warm milk available at any time. The other was made of soft terry cloth. No milk, no food at all, just texture, just something that felt like being held. The question Harlow was testing sounds almost absurd now, but in the 1950s, it was the dominant theory in psychology. Do infants attach to their mothers because mothers feed them? The Freudian position and the behaviorist position said yes, attachment is a secondary drive. The infant loves the mother because the mother is associated with the reduction of hunger. Take away the food and the bond dissolves. Harlow's monkeys destroyed that theory in a single experiment. The infant spent 17 to 18 hours a day on the cloth mother. They spent roughly 1 hour on the wire mother, just long enough to feed. When something frightened them, they did not run to the wire mother with the milk. They ran to the cloth mother with nothing but softness. They clung to her. They buried their faces in the terry cloth. And when the cloth mother was removed from the cage entirely, the infants did not simply look for food elsewhere. They screamed. They curled into themselves. They rocked back and forth in corners. They grieved. The infant who clings to the cloth mother is not confused. It is not making an error. It is following a biological drive as fundamental as hunger, and in Harlow's laboratory, more fundamental. Given the choice between food and comfort, the infant chose comfort. Every time. John Bowlby had been arguing this for years before Harlow proved it in the laboratory. A British psychiatrist who had studied children separated from their mothers during the Second World War, evacuees, orphans, children in hospitals where parents were not allowed to visit. Bowlby watched what happened when the bond was severed. Not just sadness, not just crying, a systematic collapse, protest, then despair, then detachment. A sequence so predictable it looked biological. because it was. Bowlby called it the attachment behavioral system, and his central claim was radical for his time. The infant's hunger for the mother's love and presence is as great as its hunger for food. Attachment is not a byproduct of feeding. Attachment is primary. It is its own drive, with its own logic, its own neurobiology, and its own consequences when it fails. He identified 4 defining features of this system. Proximity maintenance, the drive to stay close to the attachment figure. Safe haven, the impulse to return to that figure when distressed. Secure base, the confidence to explore the world precisely because that figure is available to return to. And separation distress, the alarm that fires when the figure is absent or unreachable. If you are over 55, you have lived long enough to recognize every one of these, not as theory, as biography. A few years after Bowlby laid the theoretical foundation, a developmental psychologist named Mary Ainsworth designed a way to observe it. The strange situation. A controlled laboratory procedure in which a mother and infant enter an unfamiliar room. The mother leaves briefly, and researchers watch what happens when she returns, not what happens during the separation, what happens at the reunion. Ainsworth found 4 patterns. Secure infants, roughly 65%, protested the separation, sought the mother on return, were comforted quickly, and went back to playing. The system worked as designed. Distress, proximity seeking, regulation, exploration. Avoidant infants, roughly 21%, appeared indifferent. They did not cry much when the mother left. They did not seek her when she returned. They looked, to a casual observer, as though they did not care. Resistant or ambivalent infants, roughly 14%, were intensely distressed by the separation and could not be comforted by the return. They clung and pushed away simultaneously. The system was activated but could not be settled, and disorganized infants, identified later, roughly 15% in low-risk samples, showed contradictory behaviors, approaching the mother while looking away, freezing mid-movement, falling prone on the floor. The system had broken, but here is the finding that matters most for what we are building toward tonight. The avoidant infants, the ones who looked indifferent, were not indifferent. Ainsworth's research team measured their heart rates during the separation, elevated. Their cortisol levels during the separation, elevated. Their bodies were in distress. Their behavior said otherwise. These infants had learned, not through thinking, not through deciding, but through repeated experience with a caregiver who rejected or withdrew from emotional displays, that showing attachment behavior costs proximity. If you cry and the caregiver pulls away, you learn to stop crying. Not because the attachment is gone, because suppressing it is the only strategy that keeps the caregiver close enough. There is no exit from attachment through suppression. The infant who learned to look away has not transcended the attachment system. It has organized itself around an unavailable caregiver. And this, remember this, is precisely the structure that Buddhism will identify from the inside. But we are not there yet. Bowlby believed this system persists across the lifespan. In 1987, Cindy Hazen and Philip Shaver tested that claim on adults. They found that adult romantic attachment distributes in patterns that mirror Ainsworth's infant categories. 56% secure, 25% avoidant, 19% anxious ambivalent. The template laid down in infancy, not as a fixed destiny, but as a default setting, persists into adulthood, shaping how you love, how you grieve, and how you respond when the phone rings at 2 a.m. Bowlby called these templates internal working models, mental representations of self in relation, built from thousands of interactions before you had language to describe them, operating below conscious awareness in every subsequent relationship. Not as memory, as prediction. You do not remember being held or not held. You expect to be held or not held. And that expectation shapes what you see, what you feel, and what you do, before you know you are doing it. In 2006, a neuroscientist named James Cone put this into an fMRI scanner. He subjected married women to the threat of mild electric shock under 3 conditions: alone, holding a stranger's hand, and holding their husband's hand. The results were not subtle. Holding the husband's hand significantly reduced threat-related brain activation, and the higher the quality of the marriage, the greater the reduction. Cone proposed something he called social baseline theory. The brain, he argued, does not treat social isolation as the default and connection as a bonus. It treats connection as the default and isolation as a costly deviation. We are literally configured to use other minds as extensions of our own processing. When a trusted other is present, the brain delegates. It does not need to mount the full threat response because the environment includes a co-regulator. Releasing attachment is not just emotionally difficult, it is neurologically expensive. The brain assumes we are not alone. When we are, it costs more to do everything. And here is where the ground shifts. Everything we have heard so far, from Harlow to Bowlby, to Ainsworth to Cone, says attachment is adaptive, healthy, necessary. The drive to connect is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. The infant on the cloth mother is not making an error. The adult reaching for a partner's hand is not being weak. The 60-year-old who still feels the absence of a parent who died 20 years ago is not failing to move on. They are doing exactly what their biology was built to do. But 2,500 years before any of this was measured, someone looked at this same architecture, this reaching, this holding, this inability to let go, and asked a question that psychology has never asked. Not, where does clinging come from? But, where does clinging lead? Chapter 2. The Anatomy of Clinging. The Buddha had a map, not a metaphor for a map, an actual structure, a sequence of 12 links, each one giving rise to the next, each one describing how suffering comes into being. He called it paticca samuppada, dependent origination. And in that chain, at link number 9, sits a word that the entire first chapter of this video has been circling without naming, upādāna. The Pali word is usually translated as clinging, but the monk and scholar Thanissaro Bhikkhu translates it as clinging/sustenance, because upādāna carries a second meaning that most translations lose. It also means fuel, the kind of fuel you feed to a fire to keep it burning. This matters, because in the chain of dependent origination, upādāna does not simply describe an emotional state, it describes a causal mechanism. From craving as a requisite condition comes clinging. From clinging as a requisite condition comes becoming. From becoming comes birth. From birth comes aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. SN 12.2. Link number 9 does not just attach. It ignites. It feeds the fire of becoming bhava, which is the process by which experience organizes itself into a self having a life, a self with a story, a self that will age and die and grieve the aging and dying. Craving reaches, clinging holds, and what it holds becomes fuel for everything that follows. The Buddha identified 4 types of clinging. Kamupādāna, clinging to sensual pleasure. The obvious one. The one most people think of when they hear the word attachment in a Buddhist context. Titupādāna, clinging to views, opinions, positions. The attachment not to a person or a pleasure but to being right. Silabbatupadana, clinging to rites, rituals, and practices. The attachment to the method itself, even a spiritual method, as though the method were the destination. And the 4th, the one that speaks most directly to everything Bowlby discovered, upādāna, clinging to doctrines of self. Stay with this one. Upādāna is not clinging to a particular identity, though it includes that. It is clinging to the project of being a self at all. I am someone who needs this person. Without this relationship, I am not who I think I am. The construction of identity through attachment, not as a pathology, not as something that went wrong, but as the ordinary, everyday mechanism by which a human being assembles a sense of who they are. This is not a description of anxious attachment. This is a description of every attachment, including secure attachment, the moment it becomes load-bearing for identity. The moment it moves from "I love this person" to "I am the person who loves this person." The moment relationship becomes infrastructure for self. Bowlby would recognize the description. He spent his career mapping exactly this process, how the internal working model, built from early attachment experience, becomes the template through which a person constructs their sense of self in relation. He would agree that the self is, in significant part, built from relational patterns. He would simply draw a different conclusion about what to do with that information. But before we reach that disagreement, there is something the data says that popular psychology does not. There is a story told about aging and attachment, you may have heard it, that goes roughly like this. As we get older, we become more secure. Time heals, experience teaches. The rough edges of anxious and avoidant attachment smooth themselves out, and we arrive at something like peace with our relational patterns. The data does not support this. In 2013, William Chopik, Catherine Edelstein, and Chris Fraley published a study of over 86,000 adults across the lifespan. They found that attachment anxiety does decrease with age. That part of the popular story is true, but attachment avoidance increases. It is highest in middle-aged and older adults. The pattern is not convergence toward security. It is a trade, less anxiety, more distance. And in 2023, Platts and colleagues, drawing on the Whitehall 2 cohort study of over 5,000 older adults in the United Kingdom, found that only 46% of older adults scored secure on attachment measures, 34% scored dismissing, 13% preoccupied, 7% fearful, 46% secure, 34% dismissing. More than half of older adults, the demographic watching this video, score insecure on at least one dimension, and the largest insecure group is not the anxious ones. It is the dismissing ones, the ones who have moved on, who have dealt with it, who do not need anyone, who have managed every loss, the death of a spouse, the estrangement of a child, the slow disappearance of a social world. By managing distance, by becoming self-sufficient, by building a life that does not require what the cloth mother offered. If you are that person, and statistically, more than a third of the audience watching this is, the Buddhist analysis has a specific name for that pattern, upādāna, clinging to the self-view of not needing, clinging to self-sufficiency as identity. This is not transcendence of the chain. It is a different position inside it. The avoidant infant with the elevated heart rate has become the 65-year-old who says "I am fine" and means it consciously, sincerely, while the body keeps the score the same way it always has. Even avoidance is attachment. The Buddhist analysis and Ainsworth's data converge on this point with uncomfortable precision. The infant who learned to look away has not left the attachment system. It has organized itself around absence. And the craving that drives this organization is what the Buddha called vibhava-tanha, craving for non-becoming, the craving to not be in a particular way, aversion as strategy, distance as identity. the suppressor is still inside the chain, and now, the sharpest edge in the entire Buddhist analysis of self. In the Kulavadala Sutta, a laywoman named Visakha asks a question of the nun Dhammadinna, a woman the Buddha himself called foremost among his nun disciples in the teaching of Dhamma. Visakha asks, which self-identification is described by the Blessed One? And Dhammadinna answers, there are these 5 clinging aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These 5 clinging aggregates are the self-identification described by the Blessed One. MN 44. Listen to what she did not say. She did not say, the self clings to the aggregates. She did not say, there is a self, and it has a problem with attachment. She said, the 5 clinging aggregates are the self-identification. The self is the clinging, not a self that clings. Clinging that constructs the appearance of a self. This is the philosophical knife edge of the entire conversation between Bowlby and the Buddha. Bowlby says, help this self feel safer, give it a secure base, update its internal working model through sustained new relational experience. The self is real, it is wounded, and it can heal. The Buddha says, the self that wants to feel safer is the clinging. The project of building a secure self is itself an act of upadana, clinging to doctrines of self, not because the project is wrong, not because the desire to feel safe is pathological, but because the self that seeks safety is not a fixed entity being repaired. It is a process being fed. Both are right. They are answering different questions. Bowlby asked, where does clinging come from? And he found, from our earliest experiences of safety and threat, written into the body before language, from the cloth mother or the wire mother, from the caregiver who held or the caregiver who turned away, from thousands of micro-interactions that became an internal working model operating below awareness, shaping every relationship that followed. The Buddha asked, where does clinging lead? And he found, to becoming, to the construction of a self that will age and die and grieve its own aging and dying, to the entire cycle of suffering, not because love is wrong, but because clinging is fuel, and fuel burns. Same phenomenon. Completely different questions, both necessary, and the fact that they arrive at different prescriptions is not a flaw in either system. It is a map of how deep the problem goes. Chapter 3. The 3 Crossings. A Devata, a celestial being, comes to the Buddha with a question. How did you cross the flood? The flood, in this context, is not a weather event. It is the flood of sensual desire, the flood of becoming, the flood of views, the flood of ignorance, the totality of what keeps a being trapped in the cycle of suffering. The Devata wants to know, how did you get through? And the Buddha answers with one of the most compressed teachings in the entire Pali Canon. By not halting, friend, and by not straining, I crossed the flood. When I came to a standstill, then I sank. But when I struggled, then I got swept away. SN 1.1. Not halting, not straining. This is the opening sutta of the entire Samyutta Nikaya, placed first, as though everything that follows depends on understanding this one principle. Now hold that teaching alongside everything Bowlby mapped, and 3 relational portraits come into focus. The one who strains. You know this person. Perhaps you are this person. The one who cannot stop reaching, who checks the phone, who replays the conversation, who rewrites the text message 4 times before sending it because the silence on the other end feels like drowning. The anxious ambivalent pattern. Ainsworth saw it in the infant who could not be comforted by the mother's return, who clung and pushed away and clung again, the system activated but never settled. The Buddha's word for this is direct, straining. And what happens when you strain in a flood? You get swept away. The current takes you. The more desperately you reach for what is not there, the less you are able to navigate what is, the one who halts. You may know this person better. The one who says, "I am fine" at the funeral and drives home alone. Who has not cried about the divorce and does not intend to. Who managed the death of a parent by managing the logistics, the estate, the paperwork, the phone calls, and never once sat with the absence itself, the dismissing pattern. Ainsworth saw it in the infant who looked away when the mother returned, heart rate elevated, face composed, the attachment system running hot beneath a surface of studied indifference. The Buddha's word, halting, standing still. And what happens when you halt in a flood? You sink. The water rises around you. The stillness is not peace. It is submersion, and the one who crosses, neither halting nor straining, moving through the flood with awareness, not grasping at the current, not freezing against it, present to the water without being owned by it. This is not a description of secure attachment, though secure attachment is closer to it than either of the other two patterns. This is a description of something Bowlby never mapped, because Bowlby's map ended at the far bank of secure relationship, and the Buddha's map begins there. Both traditions agree. Pathological clinging is a problem. Both traditions agree. Emotional shutdown is a problem. Bowlby knew this. The avoidant pattern is not health. It is a survival strategy that outlived its context. The anxious pattern is not love. It is a regulatory system in overdrive. On this, the two traditions converge completely. Where they diverge is in their answer to the question, what does crossing look like? For Bowlby, crossing looks like earned security. Adults with insecure childhood histories can reach secure functioning status. Not through willpower, not through deciding to be different, but through sustained new relational experience. A therapist who consistently meets you where you are. A partner whose reliability over years begins to update the internal working model. The mechanism is real. New experience, repeated enough, reshapes the template. The research on earned security is genuine. Roisman and colleagues in 2002 showed that adults classified as earned secure function comparably to continuously secure adults on most measures. Though Roisman also noted a methodological caveat worth holding. Earned secure adults may not actually have experienced more harsh parenting than continuously secure adults. They may simply narrate childhood difficulty more coherently. The construct is real. The causal mechanism is less certain than the popular version suggests, but the destination is clear. For Bowlby, the far shore is secure attachment, a self that feels safe enough in relationship to explore, to risk, to grieve without collapsing, to love without drowning. From the cradle to the grave, organized around a secure base. For the Buddha, the far shore is somewhere else entirely. In the Alagadaparma Sutta, the Buddha tells a story about a man who needs to cross a body of water. There is no bridge. There is no boat. So the man gathers grass, sticks, branches and leaves, and he builds a raft. He crosses safely. He reaches the far shore, and then he thinks, this raft has been very helpful to me. Suppose I were to hoist it on my head or load it on my back and then go wherever I want. Add to MN 22. What would you think of that man? The Buddha asks. The monks answer, that would not be a useful thing to do. The Buddha agrees. The Dhamma, the teaching itself, the practice itself, the path itself, is for crossing over, not for holding on to, not for carrying on your back once you have reached the other side. This is where the Buddha departs furthest from attachment theory. and it requires care, because the popular misreading of this passage, the one that circulates in wellness culture and spiritual bypassing communities, says, let go of attachment. Do not cling. Love is the problem. That is not what the sutta says. The Buddha is not saying your love is the problem. He is saying love is the raft. Use the raft. Cross with it. The Theravada position is sequential, not preemptive. Hold the raft, cross with it, then put it down. The uncrossed practitioner does not abandon the raft before reaching the far shore. That is not liberation. That is drowning with a philosophy. But the teaching is radical in a way that no amount of softening can entirely domesticate. Even the most wholesome bond, to the path, to the teacher, to the practice, to the person who helped you cross, must eventually be released. Even the Dhamma must be put down, not before crossing, but after. The far shore is not secure attachment. The far shore is freedom from the need for one. Bowlby built a lifetime of work around helping people reach secure attachment. The Buddha agreed it was worth crossing to. He simply said, it is not the destination, it is the vehicle. Now, 3 places where the 2 traditions meet in the middle of the water. The first convergence, internal working models and sankhara. Both describe how early patterning becomes a below-conscious template, shaping subsequent experience. Bowlby mapped how thousands of micro-interactions with a caregiver become an internal working model, a mental representation of self in relation that operates automatically below awareness in every subsequent encounter. The Buddha mapped sankhara, link number 2 in the chain of dependent origination, conditioned volitional formations that shape how consciousness contacts experience. Both traditions notice the same thing. The patterns you develop early run in the background of every encounter that follows, not as memory, as prediction. You do not recall the original interaction. You reenact it, and the reenactment feels like reality because it precedes conscious awareness. The second convergence, earned security and vipassana reconditioning. Both traditions affirm that clinging patterns can change, and both reject willpower as the mechanism. Psychology says, sustained new relational experience, a therapist, a partner, a community that consistently responds differently from the original caregiver, gradually updates the internal working model. Buddhism says, sustained vipassana insight, the repeated disciplined observation of impermanence, suffering, and not self in direct experience, removes the conditions for clinging. Neither says just decide to be different. Both say something must be practiced, sustained, repeated, until the underlying pattern shifts. The mechanisms are different. The rejection of willpower is identical. The third convergence, the secure base and kalyana mitata. Both traditions require a relational scaffold for development. Bowlby's secure base enables exploration. The child ventures outward because the attachment figure is available to return to. The Buddha's kalyana mitata, admirable friendship, is, in his own words, the whole of the holy life, SN 45.2. Not isolation, not independence, not the lone meditator on the mountaintop. The path requires community, but a different quality of community. The admirable friend exists not to provide emotional homeostasis, not to make you feel safe, but to support the pursuit of liberation. Same scaffolding, different building. Bowlby's base supports the self's thriving. The Buddha's admirable friendship supports the self's release. 3 convergences, 3 structural parallels, and in each case, the same pattern. Both traditions identified the same architecture. Both understood that early conditioning shapes later experience. Both affirmed that change is possible. Both rejected willpower as the mechanism. They looked at the same phenomenon and asked different questions. And their answers rhyme in ways that neither tradition, working alone, could have predicted, but they do not agree on the destination. And the disagreements are not small. Chapter 4, Where They Part. 3 disagreements. Not misunderstandings, disagreements. Places where Bowlby and the Buddha looked at the same evidence and drew different conclusions. Not because one was wrong and the other right, because they were building different things. The first disagreement, the goal of relationship. For Bowlby, the goal is secure attachment, not as a luxury, not as a nice to have, as the foundation of psychological health across the entire lifespan. From the cradle to the grave, he wrote, "We are happiest when life is organized as a series of excursions, long and short, from the secure base provided by our attachment figures. The securely attached person is not someone who does not need others. It is someone who needs others well, who can reach without drowning, who can be alone without sinking, who can grieve a loss without losing themselves in the grieving. Secure attachment is the destination, the work of therapy, of relationship, of a well-lived relational life, is to get there and to stay there. For the Buddha, secure attachment is not the destination. It is a waypoint, a necessary one. The raft must be built, the water must be crossed, the bond must be formed and used and honored. But the far shore is not a better attachment. The far shore is release from the structure of attachment itself, not from love, from the clinging that love becomes when it is fuel for the project of self. This is not a comfortable teaching, and it is not meant to be. The Buddha is not saying that Bowlby was wrong to help people reach secure attachment. He is saying that secure attachment, for all its genuine value, still participates in the mechanism of becoming. The securely attached self is still a self, still constructed, still impermanent, still subject to the chain, a healthier position in the chain, but still inside it. The second disagreement, is there good clinging? Bowlby would say yes. Secure attachment is healthy clinging. It is adaptive. It reduces threat. It enables exploration. It supports the development of empathy, emotional regulation, and resilience. The research is clear. Securely attached children become more competent adults. Securely attached adults have better health outcomes, longer lives, more satisfying relationships. If clinging is what we call it, then some clinging is good. The Buddha would say, no final good clinging. Even the most wholesome bond, to a teacher, to a practice, to a person who genuinely helped you become who you are, participates in upadana when it becomes fuel for becoming. Even the Dhamma must be put down. This is not relativism about love. It is not the claim that a loving marriage and a heroin addiction are the same kind of clinging. The Buddha recognized wholesome and unwholesome mental states with precision. The claim is narrower and more radical. Even wholesome clinging at the ultimate level sustains the process of becoming. And freedom, nibbana, is the cessation of that process. What does that mean for the person watching this at 11 at night, thinking about a spouse sleeping in the next room? It means the Buddha is not asking you to stop loving that person. He is asking you to notice the moment when loving becomes infrastructure for self. When I love you becomes without you, I do not exist. When the bond, genuinely good, genuinely healthy, genuinely worth having, becomes the foundation on which identity rests. That is the hinge, not the love. The identity built on the love. The third disagreement, the mechanism of release. Both traditions reject the idea that clinging can be removed by deciding to stop clinging. On this, they are emphatic and identical. You cannot willpower your way out of attachment any more than you can willpower your way out of hunger. The pattern is deeper than decision. It runs in the body, in the nervous system, in the below-conscious architecture of expectation. Bowlby knew this. The Buddha knew this. Neither prescribes trying harder, but they prescribe different things. Psychology says, give the nervous system a better experience. A therapist who does not withdraw when you express need. A partner who remains present when you push away. A relationship that, over time, provides evidence that contradicts the internal working model built in childhood. New data, repeated enough, updates the template. The mechanism is relational. The cure for bad attachment is better attachment. Buddhism says, give the mind insight into the nature of what it clings to. The mechanism is described with clinical precision in the Anatalakkhana Sutta. Seeing thus, the well-instructed disciple grows disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with perception, disenchanted with mental formations, disenchanted with consciousness. Disenchanted, one becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, one is fully released. SN 22.59. The sequence is specific, not suppression. That is the avoidant pattern, and the Buddha rejected it as halting. Not indulgence, that is the anxious pattern, and the Buddha rejected it as straining, but seeing clearly. Disenchantment, and then, naturally without force, dispassion. The clinging releases not because you pulled your fingers off the edge, but because you saw what you were holding, and the grip loosened on its own. And the lever, the practical mechanism, is described in the Sabbasava Sutta. The quality of attention you bring to the moment of contact determines whether that contact generates new clinging or dissolves the conditions for it. When attending unwisely, when you meet experience with the assumption that there is a self here who needs this, unarisen craving arises and arisen craving increases. When attending wisely, yoniso manasikara, when you meet experience with clear seeing, seeing that what you are touching is impermanent, that it cannot satisfy permanently, that there is no stable self doing the touching, unarisen craving does not arise, and arisen craving is abandoned. MN2. The lever is not try harder to let go. The lever is the quality of attention. Wise attention. The kind of attention that sees the reaching as it happens, not after, not in retrospect, but in the moment of contact itself. Psychology says, find a better attachment. Buddhism says, see through the structure of attachment altogether. Both reject willpower. They disagree about what comes next. And yet, the Buddhist path does not happen in isolation. The Buddha was explicit about this. Admirable friendship, kalyana mittata, is the whole of the holy life, SN 45.2. Not half, not a support, the whole. The practitioner who believes they can walk this path alone has misunderstood the path. The admirable friend is not a secure base in Bowlby's sense, not someone who provides emotional homeostasis, not someone whose function is to make you feel safe. The admirable friend is someone who helps you see clearly, who tells you the truth about your practice, who does not collude with your comfortable delusions, who supports not the self's thriving but the self's liberation. Same structure as Bowlby's relational scaffold. Different destination, and this brings us back to a finding from the first chapter that we have not yet fully addressed. The broad finding from developmental neuroscience, from Alan Shaw and the research that followed, is that early attachment experience shapes the circuitry that later handles affect regulation. Co-regulation precedes self-regulation. The capacity to manage your own emotional states develops inside a relationship before it can function outside one. The specific claim about right hemisphere lateralization is contested among neuroscientists. The localization is less certain than the popular version suggests, but the broad principle is robust. The nervous system that later does the work of meditation, of insight, of vipassana, was built by early attachment. The meditator who sits alone in a room at 5 in the morning sits in a nervous system shaped by whether someone came when they cried. Buddhism does not happen in spite of attachment. It happens on the foundation that attachment built. The raft is not incidental to the crossing. It is what makes crossing possible. And knowing this, knowing that the science of attachment and the Buddhist analysis of clinging are looking at the same architecture from different angles, asking different questions, arriving at different prescriptions, but agreeing on the depth of the problem. Knowing all of this does not resolve the tension between them. It sharpens it. End. Think of someone you have lost. You have been thinking of them perhaps throughout this entire video. The reaching that happens before you can stop it. The song, the corner. The 3 in the morning when the world has not yet corrected itself. Here is what we now know about that reaching. It is not weakness. It is biology. You are organized around connection as a survival strategy that was built before you had language to describe it, before you had a self to narrate it. Harlow's infant on the cloth mother was not making an error. It was following a drive as fundamental as hunger. And you, reaching for someone who is no longer there, are following the same drive. The attachment system does not know that the person is gone. It knows only that proximity has been lost and that every circuit in your body is firing to restore it. Bowlby mapped this with extraordinary precision. The internal working model, built from thousands of interactions you cannot remember, operating below awareness in every relationship you have had since, is not a flaw. It is architecture. It is how a human nervous system learns to navigate a social world. And the fact that it persists, that it keeps reaching, that it will not simply stop because you have decided it should, that is not a failure of will. That is the system working exactly as designed. And the Buddha saw the same architecture from the inside. Not the neuroscience, not the developmental data, but the phenomenology, the felt experience of what it is like to be a being that clings. Link number 9. Upadana, the fuel that feeds the fire of becoming. He saw that clinging is not incidental to selfhood. It is constitutive of it. The 5 clinging aggregates are the self-identification. JM N44. The self does not have an attachment problem. The self is the attachment problem, not because love is wrong, but because identity built on impermanent foundations is the mechanism of suffering. 2 traditions, 2 maps of the same territory, neither complete without the other. Bowlby asked where clinging comes from and found the cloth mother, the internal working model, the neural architecture of co-regulation. The Buddha asked where clinging leads and found becoming, birth, aging, death, and the entire cycle of sorrow. And between those 2 questions, between where it comes from and where it leads, there is a gap, a space, the moment between contact and clinging, between touching and grasping, between hearing the song and being swept into the story of who you were when that song meant everything. Both traditions say the work happens in that gap. Psychology says new experience in that gap. A therapist who stays, a partner who does not withdraw, a relationship that contradicts the old template, updates the model. The reaching learns a different shape, not no reaching, better reaching, secure reaching. Buddhism says, clear seeing in that gap. Wise attention, yoniso manasikara, the quality of awareness that meets contact without the assumption of a self who must have what it touches, removes the conditions for clinging. The reaching is seen as reaching. And in that seeing, something loosens. Neither says, stop reaching. Neither says, try harder. Neither says, the problem is that you love too much. By not halting, friend, and by not straining SN 1.1. So here is what you might try. Not as a program, not as a technique. Just once. The next time you feel the reaching, for a person, for a memory, for a version of yourself that no longer exists, do not act on it immediately, and do not suppress it. Just notice it. Feel the reaching before it becomes grasping. See the hand extend before it closes. That noticing, that half second of awareness between the impulse and the action, is what the Buddha called wise attention. It is not the end of clinging. It is the beginning of seeing clinging clearly. And both traditions agree. Seeing clearly is where change starts. Bowlby spent his life helping people find their way to secure attachment. The Buddha agreed it was worth crossing to. He just said, do not carry the raft.